Hello and welcome to the Game Dev Local podcast. I'm your host, but I'm also joined by another host, Melissa. And Melissa's going to be running the momentum of this particular session. So we're part of the Game Dev Local podcast. I'm Oscar Clark, he, him, and we are on a podquest to learn everything you want to know about game dev, but never dared to ask. Now, obviously, we're going to take a slightly different approach than we usually do. Melissa, this is me handing over to you. You take the lead. What are we going to be talking about today?
Thanks, Oscar. So today we're actually going to be talking about women in video games and the portrayal of women in games. And this is everything.
Obviously, you needed a cis white guy with a hat to talk about.
Well, you've been in the industry for like 30 plus years. And me,
that's true.
I've only been around in South Africa where it's pretty much PG, to be honest, compared to the UK, where you guys seem to have a lot of interesting things and scandals
that
seem
PG
to happen
for
here.
pretty gory?
No, PG for parental guidance.
I know, I'm sorry.
But yeah, so I wanted to ask a whole bunch of questions just to kick off this conversation.
Let's do it.
It's actually been interesting. I wrote a LinkedIn post about this very topic since a particular game came out. It was taken down last month, literally April.
And this is a Steam game, if I remember correctly.
Pretty much. Yeah. And it's the post that I created, the LinkedIn post that I made, it created a huge buzz, like the most buzz that I've ever seen on my LinkedIn feed before. So It's obviously a topic that everyone wants to talk about. And me being an ambassador and women in games, it's a huge topic that we constantly need to raise awareness and talk about, because video games have influence to change, to cause change, to create kind of, you can bring in your culture, society, backgrounds into a video game, and it influences how people view male, female, different genders, transgenders. It influences our daily lives.
Well, we are the single largest form of digital entertainment on the planet. We're the only form of entertainment that is a verb. We do. And that has profound implications on how we as human beings learn and act. And we can actually do amazing things, and we look at behavioral aspects. But most profound change that happened in my career, particularly in the last 10 so years, with I'm going to say the introduction of the iPhone, because I think fundamentally that's not the only reason, but that shift to smart devices in your pocket meant that the games became something that everybody plays. Something like 80% of the people on the planet have played a game. I've forgotten the numbers nowadays, but it's something like, 3.5 billion players of games on a regular basis. So that's a huge proportion of the audience. And one of the things that really made this sink home to me is actually a positive thing. Play for the Planet, which was set up in 2018, I think it was 2019, I'm not entirely sure. I think maybe 2019. I was invited to the launch dinner of that thing. There were about 30 people in the room. It was fantastic. I was very, very glad. In fact, a project I was working on at the time got mentioned. I was so excited.
That's awesome.
I was just a very, 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 very minor thing of design on it. But the point being, in that room, not me, but in that room, there were like 14 or so different teams, maybe slightly less, maybe 9 teams, I can't remember exactly. But they represented over 250 million daily active users.
Jeez.
That's the effect that we can have as games. And to your point, that's everybody. The biggest audience spending money on mobile, and mobile is the biggest sector, are women. So I think it's 25 to 35-year-old, or is it 35 to 45? I can't remember exactly. It does change.
Percentage.
Yeah,
the percentage.
It's a massive percentage.
Yeah, the last time I saw was like 48% of the world are female gamers.
Yeah.
And I don't know the percentage of women who actually work in video games. I kind of feel like it's maybe about a 5%.
It's definitely not 48%.
Yeah, no.
Look, we're way better than we used to be. Way better. And it doesn't mean we are, we've had our Gamergates. We talked about that earlier. We've had difficult situations. In fact, I remember Brianna Wu was on a judging thing with me at one time a few years back, and she was describing what her experience was during that time. So we've seen some really terrible things happen to women gamers, and we're not immune from those things still happening. But I think we're in a much better situation. The growth of women in games has been fantastic, and I feel lucky that there are people who tell me I'm in the list of people who are okay to be around, which makes me happy.
I mean, that's a good thing. Feel
That's
very comfortable talking about this topic with you, Oscar.
Yeah, but at the end of the day, though, it's one of those things that my instinct as the lefty is we shouldn't have to have this thing, but it is absolutely essential we have levels of safety, and that we take these issues really seriously. And like you say, this game, I don't know what the game was, but as I think in your article, in fact, do you want to describe what was the aspects that were going on in that game that concerned you?
So the aim of the game, the entire, because in every game it kind of almost has like a win-lose mechanic. The aim or the mission of the game was you assault your mother first from a young age, sexual assault. That's the background of your character. And you are now on a mission to harass and violate women and make them fear you. So that's literally the point, is just make them scared of you. Yeah.
I mean,
you take that in.
Honestly, I mean, who made this thing? Andrew Tate? I mean, come on.
I don't actually, I know it was a developer, I'm not going to name them, but I think they actually come from Eastern Europe. I'm not going to, I can't specifically remember which country, but it didn't necessarily surprise me.
If we step back a bit, okay, let's think for a second. Somebody's making a game with a background, and they're probably writing something from a perspective where they haven't got exposure to the consequences of what they're stating. Now
I'm hoping that's the case.
I suspect it isn't. I suspect I'm being too generous. However, this is a classic example, and don't get me wrong, this is an extreme example, and I'm so glad that they took it down. Obviously,
yeah. I mean, eventually, that's where the problem also comes in.
But also, I wonder whether it's prosecutable. I don't know. I don't know in terms of, because it does sound like it's inciting in behavior.
It's inciting violence. So it is something that is prosecutorial. I know that there was one company, I can't remember what they're called, but they also developed a game. This is like many years ago. This is probably like in before 20.
Well, there was the original game. I forgot the name of it that featured going into a house and killing people. I can't remember what it was. And that it's a really old game. One of the old FMV games. It's very famous. My brain cannot remember what it was called, and it was the reason why we have. I think it's one of the reasons why we have PEGI ratings nowadays. But there's an interesting problem there, which is I think in that context, it was a game. I mean, if you think about a game with terrorists. How could you have a game with terrorists attacking a city?
I don't know if I've ever heard of any. I mean, has there been any games
How about Counter-Strike? Oh, that's literally what Counter-Strike is. Literally.
Now,
that's okay. I think Counter-Strike is a fantastic, in fact, probably one of the best games of all time. I would say that I did kind of help fund the 5th beta. So, long story short, anyway,
not a bit of bias there.
I'm very proud of that I had that tiny bit of that. Anyway, the point being there is I am biased. Yes, sure. But they set up a context of terrorist versus counter-terrorist.
Yeah.
But that's part of a sort of narrative context to make the circumstances of the gameplay make sense logically. I don't think there's a problem with that, given that is the framing of it. When you're talking about framing that has no sense of its context, there are problems. And the biggest problem is that I can totally understand someone coming fresh at a game, reading Counter-Strike's description and finding it deeply offensive in the current day. So we know people who were in Paris when the terrorist attack.
Yeah, I literally was there 8 months. Well, not Paris,
Yeah,
but Belgium. I was literally was
yeah,
there 8 months, and I just saw
yeah,
the fear of
yeah,
everyone around you and the aftermath
yeah.
of the terrorist bombing attack on the at the airport, the train
So you can
station,
understand
everywhere.
someone in those circumstances, someone in that context, finding a game like Counter Strike
Yeah, you get triggered.
truly, truly terrible. But I don't think it is. I think it's a marvelous game. I think it's beautifully done. I think it's incredibly well designed. I love it to this day. Now, when we're talking about topics which are difficult, if you go in without an understanding of the context and also nuance, so I've not played this game that you described. I don't want to be honest. From everything you've said, why would I? So I don't know what context they're doing. Are we seeing somebody trying to make like an American Psycho, where you're playing Rich? What's his name? Bateman or something? I can't remember the name of the character in Psycho, American Psycho.
Oh yeah.
Anyway, so the character. Are we seeing an attempt to make an evil character and to explore their experience? And is that okay when you watch, the film? You're not being the psycho. You're not being the murderer. You're
Mm,
observing the story of this appalling individual.
mm.
Can
Well,
games, should games try to tell stories like that? My suspicion is the fact that we're asking you to act, because that's what the function is, makes
yeah.
that extremely difficult to pull off in any way that's not deeply offensive.
Yeah, because this game, you essentially are in the first person. You're not
Yeah,
observing, you're
yeah,
literally doing the
yeah,
actions. And the most revolting thing is people have played this game when it was up,
yeah,
and it had overwhelmingly positive reviews on Steam.
yeah,
I had over like 200 reviews. And of those 200 people, I'm just thinking, okay, are you, men in society who want to rape women, or is that like a is that something that you're okay with at this
yeah,
point? It it freaks me out just thinking
yeah.
about that.
But it does go to this deeper point, which is you've got a context where you're aware of the risks and
Mm,
fears and the realities that have happened to women like that.
yeah, I mean,
If
coming
you're coming,
from
yeah,
South Africa,
yeah,
we're always constantly aware of the threats to women because gender-based
yeah,
violence is a huge issue in South Africa, specifically
yeah,
during December time when men or women, like, I'm not picking a specific gender here. I'm literally gonna say anyone who drinks a lot during that time, they'll they'll resort more to being violent on the other person or the spouse or child or whatever. But it happens quite a lot, and I think I saw the statistic in South Africa: 1 in 3 women are, I don't know how to word, raped a
yeah,
day. And that's the
yeah.
statistic, and that's what we as females have to deal with in South Africa, which is why it's so unsafe. So coming from South Africa to this country,
Hmm.
I still look over my shoulder every single time I'm
Yeah.
walking, and I'm still like, thinking, how
And
to
the
defend myself.
reality is that that's not a terrible thing to do. That's a safer thing to do.
Mm,
It's not great to assume that that will happen, but also at the same time, protecting yourself and being safe is, I think, an important factor for everybody. I mean, like, so let's talk about this. So I think there's a fundamental question, and obviously we've got some background going on at the moment. The systematic behaviour in the US around removing, particularly LGBTQ
mm,
plus mentions, even historically correct ones. There was. I won't go into it, but there's so many pieces, that are so ridiculous, even down to the comical, where even the name of the plane, Enola Gay, was being removed from mention
mm.
because it has the name Gay.
Gay.
But
That's so
Enola Gay is
that's
one of the
so like
most.
arbitrary ridiculous.
Oh, but it's I don't, I mean, maybe I misread it. Maybe it's something. but I saw something talking about that. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. But the whole idea of the Enola Gay, one of the most profoundly impactful planes in history,
Mm.
that was the plane that dropped the atomic bomb, killing hundreds of thousands of people and arguably ending the Second World War. Arguably, lots of questions around
A lot
that.
of factors, yeah.
Lots of factors, and I'm making a value judgment here. I happen to be a pinko lefty who doesn't want there to be nuclear weapons. That's me. I don't insist that other people share those views. My point is, there are some people out there who are creating a set of views and foisting them on us, and are removing factual information from the discourse, in my opinion. And this
Yeah.
is an example for me, which is where I want to be careful. I want to be careful that I don't jump to conclusions that something that feels on the surface as being negative is negative. But when you have something which is profoundly disturbing, it's appropriate for us to ask questions about those things. And if it is that they are inciting behavior, then that needs to have consequences.
Yeah. And it just doesn't seem like there has been any action taken on these developers. I mean, when you look at Steam now, there's thousands of games that go up online. Like I saw one that was a game about Hitler, and that's been uploaded, and it's literally just a nude Hitler just walking around on a screen. And I'm like, is that really the content that, like, how is this game allowed on Steam? It's
But
becoming.
isn't this like the real problematic areas? Like, where do you draw the line? Because I'm not a believer in censorship at all.
Mm,
I think that down that path there are too many quagmires, because who's going to make that final judgment? But when you're dealing with situations, I think we have to understand that if there's a consequence to that content, we need to be honest about that consequence. We need to find a way to deal with that consequence. And I think that doesn't just affect the game development side. I think it means that us as game developers, we need to be responsible and think about the shadow we cast. I hate that phrase, but there is something to it. Namely, when I act, I might think I'm doing the right thing. I might
yeah.
think I'm on some mission to do some great, healthy conversations, provoke debate, challenge people's, prick people's perceptions. But am I? Have I understood the nuance? What would people who not like me feel about that content? And
Mm,
am I punching down? Because I think that's really the fundamental I have here. I feel like a lot of this content you're describing, and not just to do with misogyny, but also to do with minority groups. Even like we find ourselves kind of doing it historically in the old forms of D&D. I think we're getting better with that. We're not calling them races anymore. Anyway, that's going to cause me a whole lot of hate mail. I don't know the answer to that one. I'm just highlighting there were questions that needed answering, and they've made an attempt to answer it. If you like them, great. If you don't like it, fine. Let's have a conversation about it. My point is, if you're not part of a group that's being put down in some way, or is the target because of their identity, that feels like punching down.
mm. Especially for me coming from South Africa, that's quite a tricky topic.
Yeah.
Um,
Hey, I
it's
was at the
really
Nelson
tricky.
Mandela birthday conference, birthday festival that happened in the late 80s, early 90s,
Probably
before
the
he
90s.
was, yeah.
Oh,
So
was it before he was?
before he was released, yeah.
Okay, I think
So
that was probably the 80s then, because I think
yeah, I
he
think it was
was
the 80s,
released
yeah.
in the 90s. I think he
It
was
was
released in
Wembley
92.
Stadium, the old Wembley Stadium. It had huge numbers of bands doing amazing things. Anyway, I'm distracting. Just highlighting my lefty credentials, which again probably get like attacked. Again, we're trying to be fair here. So it is fine that you want to make a content that provokes conversation. I think that's okay. It's fine to take on radical topics, But I think we have as developers to think very carefully about what that means and the impact it has on the people around us and the audience. And if we have an audience that happens to be, like games where it's predominantly female, it's a large percentage of female audiences, and I'm going to use a different example. So Sky News did a piece accusing mobile game ads of misogyny and presentation of domestic abuse and humiliation in particular to drive downloads. That to me equally feels bad.
Yeah.
Now, again, it's hard to be clear because, I can see how, again, some of these things were intended to heighten an experience. Let's say you've got a makeup game. You make an extreme thing about the nails, about the hair, or whatever.
Or the weight.
Yeah, exactly. You shave the hair. The hair, whatever it might be. Blah 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 blah. But of course, the consequences is you're establishing what norms should be, rightly or wrongly. What right do you have to say what normal looks like, what identity looks like? Again, I'm just saying there's a whole bunch of questions that at the lowest level, it's just in bad taste. But at the darkest level is deeply worrying.
Yeah, especially since when you look at these adverts, in my head, I'm kind of thinking, why would the developers think that this would work? If you had like a makeup game and you have a woman coming in to do a complete makeover because she's got like acne all over her face, she's really quite plump looking, and you're kind of portraying her in a way that she's not voluptuous, she's plump. You're literally shaming this woman.
Shaming.
Fat shaming, and you're saying that she's ugly. Do a makeover, make her beautiful. I think I've seen that advert where in one clip of the advert she's like fat shamed and made ugly, and then you fix her up and you do all sorts of like weird things, and next minute she's skinny.
Her.
but she comes out skinny and beautiful, and you're like, wait, what? It's not okay. How does the developer think that this is okay?
And in classic example there, you just said skinny and beautiful. Well, why does she have to be skinny to be beautiful?
Nice.
That's your point. That's exactly your point. So again, I think this is the other thing is like this, and there are cultural contexts for this. So in certain regions, they may not be as engaged in what we're accused of as being woke. By the way, I think woke is great. I'm very happy to be called woke. If I'm awake and aware, and people are glad are thinking about the context of what they say, as a result, fantastic. I don't have any problem being called woke. I don't think it's about political correctness. I think it's about being aware of the context and nuances around you. So if somebody happens to be in a sphere where culturally they're not exposed to why, it's a question, because that society doesn't understand that, or doesn't care, doesn't prioritize. Let's put it that way, because it's not fair to say they don't care. They don't prioritize the equality.
Or it doesn't even affect them as well. Like, in fact, what you caught me out on is just skinny and beautiful. That's exactly that. Is just us. We as women are constantly fed all of these magazines, articles, blogs. So you need to be skinny, beautiful. You need to do your hair. You need to wear makeup. You need to do all these things to make yourself gorgeous, and then you'll attract a male. And it's just, it's been drummed down in us for years. And that's forever. That's a problem, because that's the idea of these games, is going to be drumming the idea of being violent against
But there's
women.
some psychology behind some of this stuff. So, for example, social identity theory, the in group, the we group versus the out group. We don't want to be seen as identifying with our presentation as part of what we consider to be the out group. Although I did, because I love being the outsider. Anyway, but the point being, even that's still a lie, because whilst I'm the outsider, or at least I was when I was growing up, we still had our little clique. You know, we were
Mm.
called the Square Corner, literally called the Square Corner. But
It's
we were the ones
interesting.
having the heavy metal parties and playing D&D into the late hours. Anyway,
We
that's
were
another
called the
subject.
dropouts.
Yeah.
I don't know why, because
Uh,
we never dropped out of school.
But the whole point there is that we've got these cliques, these groups that form because of people that we identify ourselves with,
Yeah,
and we identify
stereotypes.
ourselves as belonging with the in group, or as not part of the people that we reject or the identities that we reject, which is the out group. And we will often stereotype the out group. You know, people often talk about immigrants. Well, they're not really talking about people who are going through an immigration journey. They're talking about a mindlessly divine group of amorphous entities that happen to fit this criteria, and makes it easy for us to alienate them because they are the other.
Yeah.
And similarly, by you being shown, oh, you're not got your makeup, you've not done your nails, you haven't, shaved your legs. I mean, you must be wrong. You're a wrong un. You don't want to be a wrong un, do you? So let's reinforce that you're a right one by you doing the right thing in your makeup app.
Ooh,
And
triggers.
but it sells. It sells, and I get it. And by the way, I'm not against my makeup apps. Fine. I saw one of the best ideas I ever saw was never made. It's really annoying, but was actually someone may have made something similar since. But the idea was to do face makeup blending on screen, and then you would effectively get ratings based on how accurately you managed to meet a certain criteria. Typically, you were shown something, then to go and do it yourself.
Like a
And
putting foundation on
yeah,
and like contouring, as they call it.
contouring, all that kind of stuff. And the whole
Yeah.
idea of that game was it was going to be essentially relaxing and skill based,
I mean,
and to
that's useful.
celebrate the art.
Yeah.
I'm fine with that. As you can see,
I
I
would
use
be
makeup all
fine
the
with it.
time.
The only makeup that I end up using is just like focus on the eyes and
Yeah,
then blush, and that's it, because
yeah,
I was not taught foundations, contouring, blush, like all these things kicked on women's face. I wasn't
yeah,
taught that, so I don't wear it. And I'm like, that game
yeah.
that would teach you that would be
But my
useful.
my secret is I've never liked it, and I'm very happy that my wife has never really made a lot of deal wearing makeup. Yes, she'll wear some, especially if we're going out, but natural look is much nicer, in my opinion, and
Mm.
I'm glad that my wife happens to have that same view. Anyway, point being, we're talking about contextually relevant, defined to build up the audience's excitement, rather than contextually strained, or I would argue deaf, and designed to make hate.
Mm.
And the Daily Mail, famously in the UK, the proprietor once said he was making the daily hate.
And then with the Daily
Because
Fail.
the Daily Fail, I think, but the Daily Hate for me was one I think is a really appropriate line. By the way, I'm not a fan of that paper,
Mm.
but the whole point of that paper was to make you angry,
No.
because angry people buy things.
You know, that's interesting. I saw a recent post on LinkedIn talking about how AI is now going to be taking over your job as a troll because they control
Of
better than
course,
you.
of course they can. Of course they can. I mean, the AI is very good at predicting, behavior, but will always
Mm.
revert to the mean. It can't be positively creative, I would argue. And it's not getting to a whole debate about AI, because I have actually, I'm quite pro AI in certain circumstances. I just don't like
Yeah,
theft. I don't like
which
people's
is
content being stolen
another topic we're gonna have to talk into at a later date with
at a later
copyright
date.
reforms. Yeah, later
So
date.
let's go back into where we are. So where are we? What we're saying is that there have been a whole bunch of examples of misogyny, of punching down in games as the game idea, but also in the way that we market games. And I
Mm.
don't think that that's going to last. Well, it's not going to stand. Um, I think it has consequences. I mean, I'd like to know what you think.
I mean, I feel like this is quite a difficult topic, because in my opinion, that all of these games, like the video game industry, all of the games always has, I don't know, like it just caters towards the male gaze. And I feel like it's going to be a very difficult, a very difficult area to sort of break, because just from my own perspective as a woman in the video game industry, it hasn't been a very easy. It's not very inclusive to women, and seeing all these video games, I don't think I ever played a video game where women were not either just solely existed as a side character or a love interest or just an object, and they're not like an agent of their own stories. There are some nowadays, like I think like Tomb Raider and Ellie from The Last of Us, and also Aloy from Horizon Zero Dawn. But I still feel that it's kind of difficult to break this now, because I don't know, from your opinion, do you think the industry, like, it still caters to a male gaze? Do you think this is something that we're ever going to break? Because I mean, with the idea of what's been drummed down in women about their body fat shaming, they need to be
Yeah.
skinny and beautiful. Do you feel that we're ever gonna break from the idea or the trope of women just being damsels in distresses or just over
But if you
sexualized?
think about it, this is the Bechdel test. It's the same problem they're having film and TV. The number of
With
times
Marvels.
when you have two female characters and they just talk about the male characters. They don't talk about something unconnected to the male characters. That's the fact that we have a Bechdel test at all. Still, it seems like all this other stuff still annoys me. But I mean, if you think about the kind of principle here, which is, so what we're talking about is be able to have content experiences, film, TV, games, whatever it might be, that creates experiences which make me as the recipient, as the receiver, the consumer of that experience, feel I recognize a world where you are, as a woman, can be seen as yourself. It can be seen, where I as a man cannot feel challenged because there are women in the scene and I can see them and I can also see myself. And when we're dealing with, I'm a massive believer in the original dream of the internet unlocking, the chains of society, in the sense of the opportunity it has with transparency, with information sharing, and all this other stuff. I'm a believer that should be possible, but the reality is that dream, that kind of pipe dream, has been smashed by the mechanism of algorithms focused on revenue, essentially taking us to darker places. So this whole kind of circumstance I'm seeing shows that my naive hopes for what the internet would bring us
It's not
isn't
that.
the reality. It's not the whole story. I think there is still a kernel of truth to those things. I still think we can have these open debates. I think we can still do things, but when you've got bad actors that are not held to account, we see negative spirals. But we the internet being in everyone's pocket is less than 10 years old. Well, it's about 10 years old. Now think about what that means. In 10 years, we've seen this explosion in bad actor behavior, which we see in every time a new industry occurs, a new process occurs. Scam artists come along, and it takes a while for regulation to catch up. I don't think it's about regulation alone. It's also the understanding that good experiences matter. And I just don't think we're there yet. I am hopeful. There's no guarantee. There is no perpetual march to better society, but there has, on average, statistically been improvements culturally, technologically, societally. You know what I'm saying? Medically, these improvements have over time happened. We might be facing what feels like unprecedented times, but when I'm talking about the inexorable march of time we've seen so far, that happens to have been positive, that includes even the 2 world wars. So, we know that there are some things that can happen positively. So I'm going to be an optimist. I'm going to remain my optimistic hat on, but I'm going to focus on what gives me hope. And I think it's things like when I went to Jordan, Noor, who runs Malaysia and did the original Jordan Game Summit, which the Pocket Gamer guys took over and ran. I was amazed because something like 40% of the audience were women.
Yeah.
So young game designers and developers in a Middle Eastern country.
Sure, that's incredible.
It was incredible. Now, there was reasons why, because they had put a lot of effort into ensuring that was something that's possible. And it is also something where it can be done remotely. So a lot of the questions that would happen in that culture around women's exposure into other public arenas could be dealt with differently. And now I'm not making a judgment call by saying that. I'm just saying these are the contexts of that cultural space. But the result was we had some amazing people making games. And there was 2 young girls, I think 2 sisters. One of them was, I think, 10 when I first met them. Maybe 12, I can't remember. And her sister, I think, was 16. They're now grown up and they've worked for Ubisoft and various others. These 2 sisters were incredible. And it just shows the potential if you give people the space. And we didn't have to see some great white savior come in to change the culture. They found a way to make that work in that space. So I've got a lot of time for what Noor and his team did, and also the way the Jordanian game industry has developed over time. So that's an example. And yet you go to UK and I might be hosting a conference, and I might see, of the 100 people in the room, I might see 10, maybe 15 women.
Do you think that's a cultural? I can't even say if it's a. Would you say it's a cultural issue?
It's a complicated thing because I think we still have issues with leadership. By the way, I think 15% is slightly high as well, but that's another subject. I don't know what the numbers are. The Yuki guys have done a great job recently to do a bunch of surveys on the state of play. And we do over-index on LGBTQ, which is fantastic to know. I don't know if we over-index on women now. I think we under-index. By the way, when I say over-index, I'm talking about compared to other similar technology industries.
Yeah.
All technology industries have historically been slightly worse about gender balance. And I don't think we're going to get to the stage where we'll ever see like 50% because there are other cultural circumstance reasons, despite the fact that more maths degrees, more programming degrees went to women than men for a period of time, I believe. Don't quote me on that. I might have misremembered that, but I think the proportion of women who get, technology-based degrees has increased dramatically.
That's interesting.
But I'm not an expert in that space. Anyway, regardless, the point is that there's no functional barrier for any individual to be able to do any of these jobs. So what can it be other than context?
So would you think if we have more video games made by women, and they're doing relatively well or like really well, do you think in society that there are some men who feel threatened by that, and that is possibly why games like these actually come out?
Well, this is a difficult one because, I mean, a lot of the games that were designed by women in the first place, we don't even notice, and they just happen to be great games. And I mean that in a good way. If you think about the diversity of some of the games teams out there, some of the best tick games are made by the most diverse teams. I mean, I don't know how true it is, but the Assassin's Creed games make an absolute point of identifying that this is a diverse team with lots of opinions and lots of faiths and lots of ways of thinking,
Yeah.
life, culture. That's amazing, and that's more of that. The better in my mind. But the genuine thing from my personal experience, I don't want a bunch of people in the room like me because I'm loud enough. I've got enough stupid opinions, as you know from talking to me like this. I
And
want other people in the room.
do you think a room full of people with just your opinions, do you feel like that would positively shift perspectives to improve or worsen
Well,
the
obviously, I'm
industry?
perfect, so of course. No, I mean, obviously, it wouldn't. I mean, the reality is that, heaven forbid, you had two of me in a room.
No, you guys have a great conversations.
Oh no, we'd just row at each other in the best possible way. The fact is that as human beings, we need to be challenged, and I think this is what the reason I'm going down this line is because I want to come back to these incredibly, and I'm quoting the Sky News headline: "Incredibly disturbing, the misogynistic tropes used in mobile games." When I see headlines like that, I know we've broken something. Now, we as an industry faced um, undeserved criticism over violence.
Yeah,
We
I remember
we spent
that.
decades being told we were responsible because we made games. We were responsible for deaths, and it wasn't true.
It's quite severe in South Africa, where we the impact was all of this legislation came out to put further strain on the game development industry
Yeah,
to like piggy ratings and things like that. It became a lot worse. They actually think there's now a body. The Film and Publication Board is now going to do audits in video
yeah,
game companies in South Africa because they believe that video games is a reason why South Africa is so violent. But
yeah.
it's not the case. It's always
So
been
the
violent.
reality is, in fact, Kate Wood, a great friend of mine who's just amazing. She did when she was at the head of the IGDA, she did a presentation talking about this, and she showed two charts. One which was the perception of violent crime, and the other one was actual violent crime over time in the US. And the perception was like that, and the actual was like that down. It was an incredibly shocking correlated number. So the rise of perception was absolutely opposite to the actual levels of the falling levels, and it's because of the. In fact, I think this is something that's covered by Bowling for Columbine, an old film about one of the early, very loud, very very publicly aware shootings in a school.
Columbine Massacre.
Columbine Massacre, yeah.
Yeah, I remember
In Bowling
that.
for Columbine, they talked about these stats and about the actual connection was less about violence and more about the 24-hour news cycle.
Yeah,
So the
I
rise in,
remember.
yeah, sorry,
Wasn't they also attacked a lot of the video game and the film industry
yeah, they
specifically
did,
from that massacre, like
and
Quentin
also,
Tarantino's movie?
yeah, Tarantino's games were accused, and also Marilyn Manson famously.
Hmm.
And for whatever you might think of Marilyn Manson, I'm not going to make any comment on that. In that particular video, he comes across incredibly rationally. Anyway, but I don't want to get in a conversation about the rights and wrongs of Marilyn Manson, etc. Um, the fact for me is that there is we are a source of attack, and there was a shift from violence when the meta studies demonstrated without any equivocation that there was not a connection between game violence and real world violence. In fact, there was actually, in general, a disinclination as a result of playing games. However, there was a little bit of a moment about anger. And if I can't remember the specific study, but there was a particular study that talked about how, in the immediate moments following an intense gameplay session, people might be more prone to anger responses. but there was no correlation to any violent acts from that, as I recall. So anyway, the whole establishment goes away from games being about violence, and they try to find other things. So now we're talking about games and now gambling. We have games as a disorder, a games disorder, apparently, despite the fact that most psychologists in the world, to my understanding, the consensus view at least, is that games disorder is just a flavor of behavioral addiction and no different from workaholism, internet addiction, TikTok addiction, whatever it might be. The point being is that if you label something as game related, you're preventing looking at the underlying causes, because all you see is the game part.
Yeah, you're kind of judging it on surface level. You're not actually going
Exactly.
deeper into the problem to try and find a solution for it.
I'm deeply worried by that kind of approach. There is, though, a reality, which is that games can be a vector for vulnerable people who have behavioral addiction problems to use games as a way to deal with that. Now, to me, that just reinforces why we have to be careful about vulnerable people. So why are we putting out ads that attack our major demographic, that make people feel vulnerable? It just strikes me that it's people who don't consider the consequences of their actions, that aren't thinking about the impact on the industry. And do you know what worries me most? It's the fact that legislating against these things catches so much it didn't intend to. The unintended. I'm going to use the example of the online safety bill, which obviously there should be some way of keeping people safe. And it's not fully come through in terms of like people's consequences of how it's going to be implemented, I think. But what I worry about is, are we just about to enter another world of pain like cookies, where we've trained people to say okay to things that pop up?
And
that's not a good thing.
I think with the advent of this online safety bill is now, I don't know if you've ever come across websites that now say you can reject the cookies, but you have to pay.
Yeah, exactly. There's going to be that too. But on top of that, though, is to be able to do the age thing. Now, it actually came in with the age appropriate design code, where you could not treat somebody as over 18 unless you had actual proof.
And here comes the problem.
And this is the problem. What is actual proof? It's something that presents your identity.
Which now makes you even more vulnerable, because you get hackers who will literally steal that information and then sell it.
And the more people that have access have to hold that information in order to validate you. What? And why aren't we getting the banks to do it? Because they've got that information. Why aren't we getting Apple, Google, etc. to do it? And again, it's going to come back to a thing I keep going on about, which is my personal bugbear, which is Yuki made a statement that it was the developer's responsibility to do that. But we don't have the information. All we get from a store is an anonymous user ID. We have to then ask them for this additional information, which makes everybody less safe. But it's also worse than that in my mind, because it's also making it more costly, more arduous, making smaller developers have bigger and bigger barriers to entry.
Yeah, I kind of still believe that platforms are the ones who actually should be checking up this. Like, firstly, they should actually be aware of what kind of games are they're allowing to be on their platform, and secondly, they need to beef up their verification of age ratings. It should actually come from their responsibility, because they're making so much money off of video game developers.
There's two things there. It's two things. First thing is, in the physical retail world, guess who's responsible?
It's always the business.
It's the physical retailer, not the developer. But digitally, apparently, it's not the case. But there's another thing, which is another complication. A good news thing, which happened, I think, was it today, at time of recording, where a US judge has basically put an injunction on Apple. They can no longer prevent people from using external stores to retail items. So if I sell skins for my game or books for my app, I cannot be charged by Apple their 30% for that which is transacted on that third party store. Now, there are laws that are coming, I think, with the Digital Markets Act. I don't know if it's been implemented yet. You'll probably know more than I do, but I believe that the same principle is likely to be established in Europe, especially now.
I think we do jump on the bandwagon relatively. I mean, I think we kind of jump on the bandwagon a little bit later than the
it's
US.
in the regulation implicitly, I believe. I'm not an expert, but I don't know how anyone's decided how it will be enforced. Anyway, point being, what that's just done, whilst it's fantastic news for developers, it's opened up a bunch of challenges, because now even more people are going to have to store retail data to know that you're over 18. And I wonder how long it's going to be before we have a phishing exercise bonanza.
Yeah, and that opens up a whole can of worms, because those businesses, if they don't beef up their cybersecurity, and they don't, because one of the other things you have to do is if you hold personal information, you have to register with the I always get this wrong. I call them ICO, the
Information Commission Office. You have to have an information officer. You have to pay to register it. You have to define what the use of that data is. All good stuff, by the way, and all stuff that we should do, because if we are managing our game properly, we will have player data to an extent, and we should use that authentically. And look up the recommendations for best practice for game developers. I help write them. So anyway, point being, I do believe that we should be responsible. But what I worry is the implementation that we're doing these things through is becoming very arduous on smaller companies, disproportionately than larger companies.
I do agree with that, because a lot of the clients that I have coming to me can't actually afford legal, and they always be like, we don't have a privacy policy, we don't have terms of use, terms of service, we don't have any of the basic things that GDPR requires, because we just can't afford it, or we don't think it applies to us, where it actually it does, because it's a difference of like, for example, if you don't pay your ICO fee, it's an annual fee of, like, I think it was like £52 that I paid, versus if you get fined £4,000, that's enough to actually cripple an indie studio.
It's actually worse than that. The actual fine for misuse of the data, I believe, is £17 million, or 4% of global turnover, whichever is larger.
I know with the online safety bill, they mentioned the fines are so platforms are going to face a fine of about 10% of the global revenue of that platform.
Yeah.
Or
that's
18
different
million.
From it's 4% for the information, for the age appropriate design code. It was 4%. I think the same thing applies to GDPR off the top of my head.
I cannot specifically remember the numbers, but it's just as, I think it was 8%. I might be incorrect though. I should know this, but
you're the lawyer, not me. I like I say, always check with your legal person.
And the legal person will always say, the law hasn't changed. I'll just verify that.
Let me just verify. Always verify. But I think what we're coming down to is that I think we're in a really tricky era. There are obviously things that are happening in terms of what culturally is acceptable or not. And we're having some seismic changes which are happening. I would very much like to go into a certain High Court judgment, which I thoroughly disagree with. And I think is triggered by some very profoundly bad actors. But this is not a conversation for today. The point is that there are culturally changes that are happening. Whenever we're making content, I think we need to be considerate of the shadow that content casts. That doesn't mean we need to be censored by it. if we are going to make a game that features conversations about the poor treatment of women, misogynistic actions, and things like that, you need to know what you're doing. You need to present it in an authentic way and be able to communicate the nuance effectively. And there aren't many people out there who can do that well. So do you really have the chutzpah, the kind of capacity to pull that off? And I think there are only a few people who can do that well.
There's also, I mean, ever since the advent of GDPR as well, and I'm seeing so many people not actually being compliant with GDPR, I really don't think that the advent of this online safety bill is like really useful, and it's come at a really good time. But me being the pessimist, it's not likely that people are going to follow the law. They're just going to be like, oh, this is a huge problem, and they're going to panic about it for maybe a year or two, and then it'll just die out, because that's the same thing that happened with GDPR and
it doesn't affect me.
Yeah,
I'm too small.
or
No
just
one's going to
ignorance as well.
prosecute me.
Yeah, I'm just a small fish. I mean, it kind of reminds me of someone decided to create little bows based off of Minnie Mouse. And they thought, oh, we're a very small store on Etsy. Disney's not going to come after us. Boom. Etsy literally shut down their whole entire store, and they were grossing, I think, about almost £500,000 a year for just their bows. And that was because Disney basically told Etsy, you need to take this down. We're suing them for IP infringement.
They just need to relabel the Mickey Mouse and the tugboat, whatever it was, and it's no longer copyrightable.
They should have actually done that. Although Mickey Mouse, it would be difficult. I think, how would you
make them the same item?
Bow tie?
You just make them exactly the same item. Sorry, I'm being mean. I'm being
bow tie. But yeah, that's the whole thing. Is just there are so many. I mean, there's thousands of legislation out there at the moment. There's this, the GDPR. There is the online safety bill. There's a few others. The sorry, my dog's busy coughing in the background. There are so many other bills out there that always have fines attached to everything that you do as a business. And if you are infringing and you're not being compliant with any of these legislations,
it's a massive risk.
It's a huge risk, and I'm just thinking how crippling this would be for an indie studio, but also for a platform. With this Online Safety Act, what is Steam going to do now to actually make sure that they're complying? And are they're actually going to comply? Because most of the games that have come up there, some of the content is considered illegal, like rape and incest and child abuse. I mean, there was a game that did come out a few years ago.
But let's be fair to Steam. I don't think that's very common. I think that's exceptional, and I think if Steam finds those things, they will immediately remove them. I think what's often happening is where themes like that exist, more often than not, it's about a storytelling process that has gone wrong rather than a deliberate intention. And I think it's very difficult to make a call on the censorship side of those things, because we don't want Steam to go down the censorship route. But equally, if there are complaints made about content, I don't think Steam hesitates to take things down.
Yeah, it's a bit tricky when you bring in culture.
I think we should be. I think we have to be a bit respectful. I mean, I'm not saying you're not, but saying as an industry, we have to be aware that there are lots of people in these companies that are desperately trying to do the right job. And none of this conversation we're having is intended to point any of those particular stores or the teams there at. What we're trying to highlight, I think, is a cultural question about what is acceptable content. And what is acceptable content with one set of glasses, one lens, may not be acceptable content with a different lens. And how we get better, smarter at checking that is going to be really important.
How would you say that we should be checking that? Because it's quite a
So
tricky
it's so
question to
tricky.
ask.
So, I mean, there is the classic American judge that said, "I know porn when I see it." Because how do you legislate against pornography without a definition? Well, you can't, because what's pornography to one person is not for somebody else. So there is that problem. I think fundamentally, you can't expect a store to go through every detail of every game in reality, because we used to do that and it wasn't cost effective. It just wasn't manageable. Um, but you can make the games responsible for their content, and they do. And so any losses incurred, they pass on to the developer. I get that. But at what level do you say the store should have caught it? I think there's a reactive part. I think AI may help with this down the line.
Mm.
Well, I think it's a very similar problem to when we were dealing with. So one of the issues about community management is being able to identify problematic behaviour. So although thankfully, touch wood, I've never had a problem where we had to call someone to account for it. We built systems in place so that we could identify potential risks of grooming, of the propagation of illegal materials, particularly child porn, and we had to have systems in place to be able to deal with those things. Now, again, like I say, never happened, thankfully. This was the early dial-up days where I was doing most of this stuff, so I can't really, I'm not surprised we got away with it. But I do think that it's incredibly challenging. Now, nowadays, there are lots of different ways that we look. So, for example, there are like key phrases, key words, key language that's used, and often disguised language. So, back in the day, the phrase Disney as a prefix was a marker that this conversation was probably going to be problematic. Because if something was a Disney something, or alt Disney in particular, that's deep, dark stuff called the Met Police now.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah. So, I mean, again, only reason I know this is because I was doing research on how to prevent these kind of actions happening and making sure that we had systems in place and flags that would identify if somebody started to use that kind of language. Like I say, no one did, thank goodness. But knowing these are behaviors that we have to pay attention to, looking at the way people change their behavior, looking at the way we can use AI to track and identify questionable issues, maybe even getting AI to play certain games or something, or at least scroll through the thing, might be a way. But at what point do we enter the judgment call of what is genuine content and art versus what is problematic content? And I think the only real way of doing that is to have enough people complain.
A majority of people who would complain about sort of games that promote this violence is the player base, which majority were women,
But
which
equally,
helps.
this is I don't have a magic answer. But if you think about it, the people who will complain are the people who have an issue with it, and they will often be the people who will. It can often be the people who will see into the problem an opportunity to ban something they don't like because they don't like it. And I'm not saying that because of this particular topic. These questions about questionable ads where you've got images of women having their hair cut off or being beaten up or being attacked by bears is just not good. Just not good. But back in the day, because I'm old enough to remember Mary Whitehouse, they were looking for anything as an excuse to say it wasn't good enough. Somebody dropped an F word, ban the television. I mean, the before the watershed, somebody showed an ankle. How dare they? I mean, this is the balancing act we have to play with, and we're always struck with people who are coming at this from a righteous self indignation perspective, and I don't think we want to give undue time to moral outrage for moral outrage's sake. But at the same time, we cannot allow bad actors to do damaging things that affect our audience. And even if I was just, I mean, that's morally we shouldn't do it. Obviously, ethically we shouldn't do it. But even commercially we shouldn't do it. Because what does it do? It turns the player base off. At the end of the day, you might get a short-term peak because you angered people, therefore they did something, and then they churn because they just don't like the flavour of what you're offering them anymore. So I don't think
People are
long-term
so
it works.
fickle.
Yeah. Well, it leaves a bad taste. You're not going to want to play a game that's all about, abusing women in front of your family, are you?
No, definitely not.
I mean, are you going to show your mates this game? I mean, maybe you would. If you're 15 and you want to provoke people, maybe.
I mean,
But
I
you're going to
still
look like a
remember.
dick.
I do remember someone was showing I don't know what this was. It was a meme or something, but like
Yeah.
always memes are shared in schools, and images are always shared in schools, and you think, like, why would you find this entertaining? And
Provocation. It's all about so sixth form humor was the phrase we used to use around, like, in the early days of QuakeNet. There's a lot of like this kind of ranting and poking and like one-upmanship, banter, as we often call it nowadays, and it was always about going one level up, turning the knob up one point, and so going up to 11, going up to 12, going up to 13, always doing that one more thing. And when you're in a scene where everything is turned up to the extreme, you forget to notice what normal is. I would argue. And I think that, I don't think the QuakeNet era was that bad compared to some of the stuff we saw when Xbox came along and the really quite appalling behavior of some. Well, it's not an Xbox problem. It was that a lot of players on an Xbox, because they got the headphones playing Halos and Quakes and various other things, there was a period of time when there was a lot of toxic behavior going on. Not an Xbox Microsoft problem at all, a circumstance they were afflicted by. It took a lot to change that behavior, and a lot of like very ruthless, I mean, in a good way, response in community management. And good community managers learned from that. You don't let it happen. We need a community manager effectively for what's happening in these kind of ads to turn around and say, that's not acceptable. And the CAP, which is part of the whole advertising standards thing in the UK, I think are doing an investigation following this. So I suspect some ruling will come out of it. By this, I mean the misogynistic promotion of games in mobile in particular. But as I said before, at what price the rest of the industry?
Yeah, because I'm thinking it's going to open the doors to having more job opportunities for community managers, but it's going to be an additional expense for a business.
Well, but is it? Because if you're going to run AI to do it, is it actually going to be more effective to have people or AI?
I mean, I'm all pro for AI, but there has to be a point, like you said, like to draw the line. At what point do we now go, okay, how would AI know that this is dehumanizing?
Yeah, and I think that's the question. So this is where I think you need human beings, and what the AI does, when done well, is augment their performance, allow them to do things more efficiently, to be able to understand, because the AI cannot understand, only a person can understand. But at the same time, how many human beings don't have the lens to know that well, it's totally innocent. It's just a bear chasing a woman, and we're going to protect her with the fences that we pop around our town. What's offensive about that? And at one level, they're right. At one level, it's a person, doesn't matter if it's male or female, running away from a bear. We're protecting that person. It's only when you are able to put yourself in the position of that being a woman, and it represents women being chased by violent people, that the connections are obvious.
And that's another thing that with AI, who is going to be training this AI, and where is all of that training going to come from? Is it coming from one person, or is it coming from a multitude of different people with different ideas and culture?
Well,
And
well,
this
this
again
is
creates a
actually
problem.
okay, because this is actually where I think AI is pretty good, because AI always works at scale.
Okay.
And yes, you've got to train it. And actually, yes, we'll have lots of things which go wrong. We've seen people, I think, was it ChatGPT 5 or 4 or something, where somebody took a branch of it and basically trained it as badly as possible.
I think it
So
was
it
the
was
full.
terrible. I can't remember which one it was. Anyway, the point being is that yes, that can be done. But I think, we are seeing better practices. We are seeing, if it comes down to authenticity, do we want to be authentic about how we solve real human problems? Do we authentically want to engage with an audience? What's the best way for us to do that? Can we actually get the benefit of these shock ads without punching down? I suspect we can.
It's just going to be a long way till we get there.
Yeah, but then we're working out what the norms are. Like I say, this is a world which has only been at the scale it is for 10 or so years, 10, 15 years. Arguably since
How old is
2008.
the how old is the gaming industry really? Because it started in,
Well,
say, even before the 1980s. It started in the 1970s.
70s arguably with, what was it, Space War, I think, was 70s. I can't remember exactly when. Obviously Space Invaders and those kind of arcade machines based in the kind of early 80s,
Pac-Man.
late 90s. Sorry, late 70s, sorry, early 80s. I remember the local fish and chip shop with the Space Invaders in. Defender, one of my favorite games of all time. Every time I go to the US, to San Francisco particularly, there is a machinima museum which has the Star Wars arcade machine.
Oh wow.
So I have to go and do a trench run every single time I'm in San Francisco. I just can't help myself. I actually played Area 51, one of my favorite gun shooter games, from start to finish last time I was in San Francisco. Anyway, I'm such a nerd. But the point is that era, and then you think about the kind of scale era that post that, the 80s to the early 2000s, you'd argue kind of PC era, consoles coming along, blah 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 blah. Mobile, we were doing 3G mobile games in 2003 to 2006 when I was doing that. We were the most successful in the world in terms of revenue per user. But I'm just saying.
Just giving yourself a
But
little bit of advertising there.
yeah, exactly. But the point is that the amount of money that we made at 3, even though we were the highest revenue in terms of revenue per user, was tiny. We made less money than many big game studios make every month. In a year, they make as much money we made in a year. Some of them make in a month.
That
That's
puts it
the
in
scale
perspective.
difference. So think about the explosion from the 2003 to today, where we had fractions of revenue. We were not even tracked properly in the early days. And it's only in 2008 when the iPhone 3G and the App Store was introduced that we started to see that transformation. It took maybe till 2014 for that to start to scale. And then from then on, mobile has been heading towards the sort of 50% of the industry since that point, basically. But the industry has been growing significantly, with the exception of the post-COVID period, the great realignment, as I'd like to call it. So if you think about it, we could go back to the 80s. So we're talking maybe, basically my lifetime. The games industry has been around in my lifetime.
Yeah, which is why you're such a good person to talk to about issues like this, because you've seen it all.
But
Well,
then I was
almost
a very early adopter. I was playing D&D from age 10. I had a Apple IIe with a dial-up modem. The only person I knew in my town at the time who had a modem. That's not quite true. There was one other guy. But we were, playing online games back in 1984.
Geez, we didn't even have access to that. I think
Yeah.
the most games that we played in the 90s was like, I remember playing Diablo, and there was like a couple of other classics, but
Yeah.
in South Africa we had dial up from like, I think probably when I was in actually probably when I was like very, very young, because my dad always had a
Yeah.
business and he sometimes worked from home. So we had access to it, but we never played online games because
You
it
have to
just
bear in mind,
wasn't.
though, 1984, I had a 96 baud modem, so 9,600 bytes per second, whatever. Whereas
Whoa,
bits
fancy.
per second, rather than 56k, which was the level we had in the late 90s, so like 98, we had like 56k modems. So we're talking about text-based games only.
Wasn't our modems also quite huge? I remember the equipment that, like, it's almost like the equipment was bigger, and then over time it just, the modems like
Yeah,
shrank
the one
down.
I had rubber suction cups. You put your phone handset into, so it had the audible signal.
Wow.
It was high tech.
I mean, like, if
If
you
you
explain all of this to kids nowadays, they'd be like, "What's that?"
What's that exactly? So if you ever get a chance to see Matthew Broderick's War Games, basically I had a modem like that. Um, in a
Wow.
similar kind of era. Anyway, so we should wrap up because we've been
Yeah.
around 20 minutes. I think what if we can sum it up for me, I think we're in difficult times right now. We were starting to make progress, in my opinion. The desperation to be able to sell my game, not my game, but sell a game, I think is demonstrated by people taking these disturbing, or even if it's not disturbing, non creative content that isn't aware of its context. And whether that's in the ad or in the game, I think creative content that's not thinking about the consequences of its message, I think is a profound worry. And I hope that none of the people who listen to this podcast, and none of the people who's part of the game dev local community, I hope you wouldn't try to do that. But I don't want that to be a chilling effect on making challenging games. I think one of the joys of being an indie is that we can make challenging games, but I don't think doing a game that punches down is challenging. I don't think doing a game where it's a guy talking about or playing a role about sexual assault is a challenging concept. I think it's a appalling concept. Now, a woman writing a game talking about the effects of sexual assault,
That's an interesting.
completely different story. And how can law tell the difference? That's my worry.
Yeah, I feel like that's where legislation is very behind the times, and
Yeah.
it's very slow progress. I mean, like, if I think about technology now, legislation is light years behind.
Yeah. And it
and
always will be.
and it's
But
when it's
equally, it's a blunt instrument. I don't think legislation can differentiate between a story in game form around sexual assault that comes from a position of explaining the impact and consequences versus one which glorifies. I don't think there's language we can realistically expect in legislation that can deal with that honestly and authentically.
yeah, and every single country has different legislations as
Yeah,
well. So
yeah,
that's also something to factor into. Not that we're trying to scare anyone off from developing video games. We're just trying to teach them to be aware,
yeah,
be like conscious of the games that they're making. And it's that whole idea is everyone has a different perspective, and everyone has a different point of view. You kind of have to put yourself into someone else's shoes and then see
absolutely.
from their point of view how this game would come across. But yeah, legislation, coming from a lawyer, I say legislation is very slow, but this is why we come in, because I mean, I have met other lawyers who are black and white, and they do follow the letter to the law, or to the T. But there are others who actually are able to interpret legislation a lot easier. And if you're ever in any trouble where a game is being portrayed incorrectly, that you are trying to educate the world that from a female perspective, this is wrong, and you're trying to create a whole entire storyline about that, and then a platform shuts it down and say, oh no, this is about rape and it's bad. This is not allowed.
Yeah.
That's when legal comes in and just helps to sort of fight your case. Very expensive, very costly, but I mean this is why I sometimes don't. I like legislation, and then another time I don't like legislation, because if you over legislate something, it ruins progress. It doesn't help the growth, and that's also, as you said, we're in a very strange time now where I kind of feel like we're one step back and then we go a little bit forward, and then another step back and we go a little bit forward. It's kind of it is kind of like that. That's
For me, what sums it up is that no game is an island. Every game exists in the world, and we cannot but pay attention to the space around us.
Philosophical Oscar.
I love to have this zinger at the end. On that note, thank you very much, Vanessa. That's been fantastic chatting to you as always, and hopefully you guys have enjoyed this. This has been your Game Dev Local podcast. If you've enjoyed it, if you disagree with us, if you like, subscribe, share, come and join us in the Discord. Come and argue with us. Tell us we're wrong. Tell us we haven't gone far enough to condemn, or are we being too judgmental? You tell us what you think. At the end of the day, I think that there is no good answer here. We have a bunch of conversations that we have to have honestly with ourselves as an industry, but equally we're at risk of being attacked because we haven't had those conversations yet. And on that note, thank you very much for joining us, Minister. Thank you again, and we'll be talking more about similar topics whenever they arise. On that note, thank you very much.
Good night.